He stood beneath the spotlight, a letter trembling slightly in his hand. "I am not your charity," he said. "I am your legacy." The room froze, not because he was wrong, but because no one had ever dared to say it aloud. This wasn't the speech they expected. This wasn't the boy they remembered. But tonight he wasn't asking to be seen, he was declaring it. Before we dive into this unforgettable story, tell us where in the world you are watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. We read every single one. And if stories of truth, justice, and quiet power speak to you, don't forget to subscribe. We're building a space for stories that need to be told, stories like his. The Harrington Foundation Gala shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers in downtown Boston. Laughter moved like champagne, light, expensive, rehearsed. This was old money territory. 60 years of curated power wrapped in philanthropy. The Harringtons weren't just wealthy, they were legacy rich. The kind of family whose name opened Ivy League doors before grades ever did. Benjamin stepped through the entryway, the soft click of his shoes muffled by thick carpet. He paused, his presence barely noticed, deliberately unnoticed. Everything smelled of old money, cologne too musky, tuxedos too crisp, smiles too fixed. The portraits greeted him first, Dr. and Mrs. Harrington in every frame, their daughters Elise and Vivian beaming beside them, a golden retriever, a European vacation. He wasn't in a single one. A thin line formed at his jaw, but he walked forward, spine still. People turned. Not many, but enough. A woman in pearls whispered behind her hand. A man in a tailored suit blinked twice, recognition dawning, then quickly looked away. They remembered him. They just didn't know what to do with him. At the far end stood a marble podium with a silver plaque reading, 60 Years of Impact, the Harrington Foundation Gala. Behind it, a banner hung honoring those we've lifted. Benjamin scanned the room. Vivian was in conversation with a tech CEO, her eyes flicking past him without stopping. Elise was surrounded by campaign donors, still blonde, still charming, still pretending not to see him. And at the center table sat Elizabeth Harrington, still commanding, still cold, still calling him young man like it was a name tag and not a dismissal. Benjamin's chair was near the back, at a table marked Special Guests, between a junior senator's aide and someone's +1, close enough to be included, far enough to be invisible. A waiter brought sparkling water with lemon when he'd asked for still water, no lemon. On stage, the orchestra played a slow jazz rendition of What a Wonderful World. It didn't sound wonderful, it sounded curated. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? Everyone turned. We are honored tonight to celebrate the legacy of the Harrington Foundation. One of those lives is with us this evening. Benjamin didn't move. His heart didn't race. Not anymore. Please welcome Mr. Benjamin Reynolds, the Foundation's very first scholar, a living symbol of what hope, opportunity, and education can achieve. Polite applause scattered like forced rain. He stood, not by choice, but by spotlight. Eyes pinned him like insects in a museum, admiration tinged with something colder. He nodded once, then sat again. Nothing more was expected of him. Just presence, just proof. Across the room, Elise finally met his eyes, just for a second, just long enough to remember. She looked away first. The slideshow began. Images flickered onto a screen. Groundbreaking ceremonies, smiling beneficiaries, ribbon cuttings. And there, buried in the middle, a single image. A young black boy, maybe 10, in an oversized blazer holding a certificate. His smile is small. His eyes are too old. That was him. That was all he got. He leaned back, let the shadows hold him. He thought of the guest room, the one with the broken window latch, the mattress with plastic underneath. the closet filled with old Harrington coats. They called it his room, but he never called it home. Elizabeth had once said, "We wanted you to feel included," and he had smiled, grateful, because that's what you did when you were sponsored. You smiled, you stayed quiet, you posed for the photos but never framed them yourself. A new speaker took the stage. It was Vivian, nervous but polished. She spoke of legacy, of generosity, of family. When she said we, she meant them, never him. Never the boy in the oversized blazer. Never the man who built his future from scraps of false affection. Benjamin folded his hands in his lap. They were steady because he knew something they didn't. Something folded in his pocket, waiting, heavy with ink and memory. Tonight, they celebrated their story. They just didn't know who would finish it. The guest room was at the far end of the hall, past the linen closet, past the second staircase, and always past the real rooms. Benjamin never had a banner. He was 9 the first time he stepped inside. The air was dry, faintly dusty. The bed was low, the mattress stiff, wrapped in plastic that crackled under his weight. A lamp with no bulb, a clock that blinked noon endlessly, and a small window with a broken latch that whistled at night. He had no desk, no pictures, just a cardboard box with his clothes, a cracked action figure, and a borrowed identity. Elizabeth Harrington had shown him in, smiling like she'd done something noble. "It's not much," she said, "but it's safe." Then she closed the door, and Benjamin sat there, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly, afraid to belong too much. Down the hall, laughter spilled from Elise's room. She had a canopy bed, glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, trophies from tennis, debate, and sailing. She had space for dreams, he had silence. The first week, he called Elizabeth Mrs. Harrington. By week 2, Elizabeth corrected him. "Just call me Elizabeth, dear. We want you to feel part of the family." But it was a family with rules, unspoken, sharp as glass. At dinner, he sat near the edge of the table, not quite next to anyone, close enough for the photo, far enough to be cropped. The conversations were rehearsed. Vivian was accepted into Yale. Someone would say, Elise's summer at Stanford was such a success, and then silence until someone turned to him with a tight smile and asked, "So how's school?" As if the question itself was charity. He learned to smile back briefly, just enough to show he appreciated everything he was told he'd been given. But the thanks never stopped being expected, like rent paid in humility. At night, he read under the sheets with a flashlight. His father had taught him that before the accident, before the news came in a white envelope. Before Elizabeth and Richard Harrington arrived at the group home with their smiles, their paperwork, and their promises, Benjamin remembered the look in his caseworker's eyes, relief. As if Benjamin had won something, but it didn't feel like winning. Sometimes Elise would sneak into the guest room when she couldn't sleep, sit on the edge of his bed, and whisper about how bored she was with piano lessons or how she hated French homework. She called him Benji. She made him laugh. Benjamin held on to that like oxygen until the day someone saw them just sitting, just talking. And suddenly, he wasn't a scholar anymore. He was a risk, a distraction, a cautionary tale. Elise stopped coming after that. She didn't explain. She didn't apologize. She just stopped. Elizabeth became colder. The compliments were sharper, the hugs tighter but shorter. "Don't forget where you came from, young man," she whispered once, touching Benjamin's cheek with a manicured finger. And Benjamin understood. He wasn't there to grow. He was there to be grateful. In 7th grade, there was a family photo day. Everyone wore coordinated blues and whites. Benjamin was given a cream sweater that was 2 sizes too big. When the photo was printed weeks later, it hung in the front hallway. Benjamin wasn't in it. When he asked Elizabeth why, the woman smiled gently. It just didn't come out right, darling. Next year, we'll do another. They never did. By 15, Benjamin stopped asking for rides to school events. He walked when he could, caught buses, and learned how to stitch his uniform when it ripped. When the school counselor praised his essay in front of Elizabeth, saying it was good enough for a national prize, Elizabeth tilted her head and said, "Yes, he's always been so motivated," as if effort was compensation for origin. At 16, Benjamin made it to the state debate finals. He came home with a ribbon and a tired smile. No one was waiting up, so he taped the ribbon to the guest room mirror. The next morning, it was gone, folded and placed in his dresser drawer. "Don't clutter the glass," Elizabeth said. "It's not your space to decorate." By 17, Benjamin knew the rules too well. He kept his trophies in a shoebox under the bed. When the acceptance letter to Georgetown came, he read it alone on the porch swing. No one clapped. No one hugged him. Elizabeth just nodded and said, "Well done, dear. We're very proud. You'll make us look good." That was the last straw disguised as praise. He left 3 weeks later. No goodbye dinner, no framed photo, just a check written out to his tuition with "Use it wisely" scribbled in the memo and a cold hug. He took the check, his shoebox of ribbons, and left the guest room key on the counter. No one called after him. No one ever came to visit. Success, they said, was his redemption. They wore him like a medal. The Harringtons never forgot to mention his name at fundraisers. Our first scholar, Richard, would beam, drink in hand, arm around a senator. Elizabeth would smile beside him, lips tight, eyes flicking sideways toward Benjamin like he was a plaque on the wall. He was invited to speak at their galas. Not too often, just enough. He knew the script by heart: gratitude, opportunity, resilience, the carefully packaged story of a boy who came from nothing and was given everything. What he was never allowed to say was that everything came with conditions, that the cost of their praise was his silence. Georgetown was hard. Not the classes, the pretending he hadn't been shaped by sharp looks and sharper silences. He studied harder than anyone, graduated early, magna cum laude, wrote op-eds that got published. They called him inspiring. But when he spoke at panels, the introductions always included the same phrase, raised by the Harrington Foundation like a label stitched into his skin. Benjamin never corrected them, not once, because the moment he did, he knew what would happen. The funding would slow, the doors would close, the warmth would turn to frost. So he smiled, he shook hands, he said, "Thank you." And it worked until Elise came back. It was during his second year of law school. He hadn't seen her in years. But there she was at a conference on social equity, standing at the coffee table with her perfect suit and easy grin. "Benji," she said, like no time had passed. Benjamin didn't move. Elise stepped closer. "You look incredible." Benjamin didn't reply. Elise laughed softly, awkwardly. "Still mad at me?" Benjamin stared at her. Not mad, just tired. Tired of ghosts arriving dressed as memories. Elise didn't apologize, but she asked him to dinner. Benjamin said yes. They talked for hours about childhood, about ambition, about guilt. Elise called him brilliant, said she read every article he published, said she was proud. And for a moment, Benjamin let himself believe she meant it. Until 3 weeks later, they were walking near campus, holding coffee, laughing. A woman from her mother's foundation committee passed by. She waved. Elise waved back. "Who's this?" the woman asked. And Elise hesitated just a beat too long. Then she said, "A friend from school. Not the boy I grew up with. Not even Benjamin, just a friend." Benjamin smiled politely and never called her again. When he didn't return her messages, Elise left a voicemail. I panicked. Okay? It was politics. You know how it is. Yes, Benjamin knew exactly how it was. It was politics when they erased him from the photo. It was politics when Elizabeth removed his name from the holiday card list. It was always politics when the truth got inconvenient. By the time he graduated, the Harringtons were back in his inbox. Would he speak at the Foundation's 60th? Just a few words, just 5 minutes. Benjamin stared at the email for a long time. He almost deleted it, but something in him stopped because maybe, just maybe, this time he wouldn't read the script. The call came just 2 days before the gala. Mr. Benjamin, it's Walter. He froze. Walter, the Harringtons' groundskeeper, the only person who ever whispered, "You okay?" when no one was looking. I need you to come by the estate, he said. Benjamin didn't ask why. The next morning, Walter met him at the side door. I don't have much time, he said. Neither do you. He followed him to the main study, Elizabeth's study. On the wall hung a familiar frame, a portrait of the family. Benjamin wasn't in it, but he had stood behind the camera that day. You see this frame? Walter said, tapping the corner. It's a shadow box, double-lined. He pulled a pen from his pocket, slid it under the edge. The frame popped loose. Inside, taped to the back, was an envelope, yellowed, sealed, with his name, Benjamin. Mrs. Harrington gave it to me before the stroke, Walter said. She said if anything ever happened, it was for your hands only. Benjamin stared at the envelope, his name in Elizabeth's handwriting. Did she say what it was? Walter nodded once. She said it was the truth and that she was sorry. Back at his hotel, he opened it. The paper inside was thick, handwritten in deep blue ink. My dearest Benjamin, if you're reading this, then I have failed twice. Once by silence, and again by not finding the courage to face you. I was a coward. I let the world dictate what I should be proud of. I let fear write the script, and in doing so, I wrote you out. You were not just a boy we helped. You were not our project. You were my son. You were born of a love I was too weak to claim publicly. Your father, he was brilliant, kind, and I was ashamed of how little I fought for either of you. When he passed, I thought I was doing the right thing by bringing you into our home, but the terms weren't love. They were control. I see that now. Richard told me we needed to keep it quiet, that it would damage the Foundation's image, that it would be enough to give you a name and an education. But you deserved more than a name. You deserved a mother, and I didn't give you one. I wrote you out of speeches. I let them photograph around you. I let them treat you like proof of their goodness instead of proof of my blood. I'm sorry. I know I can't fix what I broke, but I can leave you something. Not money, not attention, but truth. You belong to this family whether they like it or not. And for what it's worth, if I could do one thing right, it would have been this, loving you out loud. Mom. He folded the letter. His hand steadied. Everything inside him that had screamed for years finally heard, not by applause, but by truth. Tomorrow he would walk into their celebration with this letter in his pocket, not for revenge, but for remembrance, not to embarrass them, but to unerase himself. The ballroom lights dimmed as the host returned to the podium. And now, to close this beautiful evening, we invite to the stage someone who has always embodied what the Harrington Foundation stands for, our very first scholar, Mr. Benjamin Reynolds. Polite applause scattered. Benjamin stood slowly. The crisp lines of his tailored suit cut against the soft lighting. Each stride was deliberate, calm, but inside, a storm pounded against his rib cage. He passed table after table, faces turned curious. Elizabeth's portrait loomed large on the wall. Richard shifted in his seat. Elise didn't move at all, not even her eyes. He stood behind the podium. A single spotlight burned down. He didn't smile. He didn't clear his throat. He simply looked at them. All of them. The donors, the dignitaries, the family, and the lie. He placed both hands on the podium, still steady, still his. His voice, when it came, was soft, not because he was afraid, but because he wanted every ear in the room to lean in. "Good evening," he said, "and thank you for inviting me." No one moved. He scanned the sea of tailored suits and sequin dresses. He saw legacy manufactured and polished. He saw power built on curated stories and controlled silence. And then he saw Walter standing in the very back, hat in hand. He gave him the smallest nod. Then he reached into his pocket slowly. From inside he pulled a folded envelope. He held it up, just enough for those who knew to recognize it. "I found this letter last week," he said. "I wasn't looking for it. It found me." The room didn't breathe. He unfolded the paper with care. "It's from Elizabeth Harrington, written in her hand, and it begins like this." He read, "My dearest Benjamin, if you're reading this, then I have failed twice." A gasp escaped someone near the front. A fork clattered. Benjamin didn't stop. He read every word, every apology, every confession, every truth they had worked so hard to bury. By the time he reached the final lines, "You were not our project, you were my son," there was no more pretending. The silence cracked. A woman covered her mouth. Elise's hand clenched the edge of the table. Richard's face had gone ashen. He folded the letter once more, then spoke, not as a scholar, not as a symbol, but as himself. "I was raised in a house that gave me everything but acknowledgement. I was praised publicly but never embraced privately. They called me a success, but only when I was silent." He paused. "They told a story where I was lucky to be here, but they never admitted that I belonged here. And now, for the first time, I speak not as a guest." His eyes locked on Richard's, but as a Harrington. The name echoed like thunder. He stepped back from the podium. "I don't read this for revenge," he said. "I read this because stories can't heal if they stay buried, and because little boys in guest rooms deserve to be remembered." No one clapped. Not yet. No one moved. They weren't ready. But now they had to sit in it. The discomfort, the shame, the truth. Benjamin turned and walked down the stairs. His steps didn't falter. His head didn't bow. He passed Elise. Her lips parted, but no sound came. He passed Richard, still rigid, and he kept walking because the letter was read. The silence was broken, and the room was his now. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt invisible in a place you were told to call home? Share your experience in the comments. Until next time, stay bold, stay seen, and never let anyone write you out of your own story.